So I'd like to move on to the next part of the program, and I think this is something I have personally also been really looking forward to, because this doesn't happen every day. We are joined today by Mr. and Mrs. Swarup, Aparna Swarup and Vikas Swarup, and we'll have the pleasure of their company at the retreat. Mr. Swarup, Vikas Swarupji, please join us on stage. He's an Indian author, he's a diplomat. Many of you already know about his debut novel, Q&A, which was adapted into an Academy Award-winning movie that we've all seen and heard about, Slumdog Millionaire. By career, he's a diplomat and an IFS, distinguished IFS officer who served in many countries like Turkey, US, I think he was High Commissioner Canada as well, Ethiopia. And through his books like The Accidental Apprentice and Six Suspects, it's a combination of gripping storytelling, but delving into socio-political observations. And I think his experience of being a diplomat, along with his literary talents, is something that we are all looking forward to enjoying this evening. So thank you for being here and making time to join us.
Thank you, Geetika ji, for that lovely introduction. Mr. Alok Mittal, President, TIE Delhi-NCR, distinguished members, guests, ladies and gentlemen. 2 months ago, your executive director, Mrs. Upasana Sharma, gave me a call. She asked just one question. Mr. Swarup, do you believe in free speech? Naturally, I said, yes, of course. Excellent, she replied. You will be delivering one at our Silver Jubilee retreat on the 27th of February at Taj Damdama. And that's how I find myself here this evening. But let me assure you, it is far more than a duty. It is a genuine pleasure and a privilege to address an organization that has spent the last 25 years shaping the future of entrepreneurship through mentorship, networking, education, and funding. Nowhere has your impact been felt more profoundly than in India. Today, as we stand as the world's third largest startup ecosystem, boasting of 117 unicorns, it is a testament to the trailblazing vision and efforts of TIE. Your legacy is one of endurance, excellence, and empowerment. So tonight, as we celebrate your extraordinary journey, I am deeply honored to share this moment with you all. Because never before have entrepreneurs been more crucial to shaping the future. The 19th century was the century of industrialization. The 20th century was the century of globalization. But the 21st century is the century of innovation. And the entrepreneur is central to innovation. They are the visionaries who transform bold ideas into groundbreaking ventures. Speaking of ventures, I wonder if you heard about this entrepreneur from Mumbai called Chandru, who needed seed money for his latest idea. And of course, he did not have any recourse to TIE Mumbai or TIE Delhi. And that is why his problem was there was no one who was willing to lend him that money. So he hit upon a totally novel approach. He invited all his high net worth friends to a party and hired a hypnotist as the main attraction. The event took place in a room much bigger than this with about 300 people in attendance. Soon after dinner, the hypnotist came onto the stage and began his act. He withdrew a shiny watch from his pocket, held it out, and instructed, "Watch the watch, watch the watch, watch the watch." The crowd became mesmerized as the watch swayed back and forth, light gleaming off its polished surface. Hundreds of pairs of eyes followed the swaying watch. The hypnotist then began chanting, "Follow my voice, let fortunes rise. Invest in Chandru, he is smart and wise. A bold new venture, don't think twice. Give your money to Chandru tonight." And believe it or not, it worked. The men began opening their checkbooks. Even the ladies reached into their handbags, not for their lipsticks, but for their MasterCards and Visas. Chandru was just about to collect all the pledges when suddenly the hypnotist's fingers slipped and the watch fell to the floor and shattered. Shit, said the hypnotist. You can imagine what happened after that. I don't want to be graphic, but I'm told it took 3 weeks to clean up the hall. I assure you, I have no intention of causing any such disruption. As a diplomat, I was trained to keep things calm, not create chaos. And as an author, my goal has always been to provoke thought, not turmoil. But I have learned that neither diplomacy nor storytelling is ever a straight road. Both require navigating complexities and embracing unpredictability. My time in the Indian Foreign Service gave me a front row seat to some of the world's most fascinating events, cultures, and yes, occasional diplomatic absurdities. Yet for many, the work of a diplomat remains something of a mystery, shrouded in misconceptions and caricatures. And that is because unlike the IAS or the IPS or even the IRS, the IFS is a rare species, simply because there are so few of us, just over 1,000 direct recruit officers. And not many people have the opportunity to meet a foreign service officer or interact with diplomats or visit an embassy and see how it works. Even if you visit an embassy, you only get to see its passport and visa section and are not privy to the inner workings of the mission. And this has spawned a number of misconceptions about diplomats. Some think that diplomats are people who are paid to lie on behalf of their country. Others see them as out-of-touch elites who spend the time roaming the cocktail circuit, meeting presidents and kings, and kissing the hands of queens. As one comedian remarked, the public thinks diplomacy is 70% protocol and 30% alcohol. In reality, of course, diplomacy is very serious business. If defense is primarily about power, diplomacy is about influence. And in our 21st century world of social media, nothing matters more than influence. Nations are competing not just for military or economic power, but for the power to tell their story, to win hearts and minds, and to shape the global discourse. In this battle of narratives, influence is the ultimate currency. That is why diplomacy demands not just skill and finesse, but also courage, adaptability, and a vast knowledge base. Unlike the narrow specializations of other professions, diplomats must navigate an astonishingly broad spectrum of issues. One day negotiating a trade agreement, the next handling an Indian community event. They oversee everything from disarmament talks to cultural diplomacy, from facilitating foreign direct investment to managing developmental projects. And yes, they also issue passports and visas, though that is just a fraction of what an embassy truly does. In a world where geopolitics is increasingly shaped by perception and narrative, a diplomat must be part strategist, part negotiator, part storyteller, and sometimes even part crisis manager. To take my own example, yes, during my 35-year career in the Foreign Service, I met Queen Elizabeth and Nelson Mandela and Barack Obama, but I've also stood in sweltering heat at the intersection of Turkey, Syria, and Iraq in 1990 during my very first posting in Ankara, arranging buses for Indians fleeing the first Gulf War. During my posting in Addis Ababa, I was tasked to charter a plane, any plane, in Djibouti of all places, to rescue Indian teachers from Asmara trapped in the Ethiopia-Eritrea war. This involved negotiations with a bunch of Somalian pirates who ran a dodgy service called Dalo Airlines with Ukrainian planes and Russian pilots, and what unfolded had all the elements of a Tom Clancy thriller. During my posting in Japan, I saw the horrors of the Fukushima earthquake, but also the resilience of the Japanese people. In fact, this is the real charm of the Foreign Service, the sheer range of experiences it exposes us to. Some of these experiences test your nerves in ways no training manual can prepare you for. When I was director in charge of the Office of the Foreign Minister of India, I once landed in Pakistan without a Pakistani visa with the Foreign Minister, Mr. Natwar Singh, because my staff in the minister's office had mistakenly carried my old passport rather than my new one. Luckily, having been director Pakistan, I had enough friends in the Pak Foreign Office to avoid going to jail and creating a diplomatic incident. But on the positive side, I have watched India win the inaugural T20 World Cup at the Wanderers Stadium in Johannesburg, and Swarup lift the NatWest Trophy at Lord's. I have heard Sarah Brightman sing Phantom of the Opera at the Todaiji Temple in Nara, the world's largest wooden structure, and watch Swan Lake being performed at the Bolshoi Theater in Moscow. I've even found myself in a gym in a New York hotel doing push-ups with just one other hotel guest who for some reason had a security detail with him, and later on it turned out he was Benjamin Netanyahu. But nothing can beat the thrill of flying India's flag, representing my country, speaking from a podium behind a placard which says India, as I did from the horseshoe of the UN Security Council in 2021, when India was a member of the UN Security Council. The other perk of being a practicing diplomat is that it gives you a ringside view of history being made. I lived through the end of the Cold War, the fall of the Berlin Wall, the rise of China from backward agrarian country to industrial powerhouse, and the relentless march of globalization, with even a supermarket in Addis Ababa selling everything from Huggies diapers to Colombian coffee. I have seen the evolution of technology, from my first exposure to WordStar and the Commodore 64, which many of you probably have never seen, to my first fax machine, my first cell phone, and my first Twitter account. But the biggest change I saw pertained to our own country, as India went from a sleeping elephant routinely lectured to by the West to being the fastest growing major economy quoted by the entire world. I learned to appreciate the unique sweet spot that India occupies in international relations as a country that can talk to everyone and be friends with everyone. So India can be a member of the Quad with the US, Australia, and Japan, but also a member of BRICS with Russia and China. Prime Minister Modi can visit Saudi Arabia, but he can also visit Iran. He can hug President Putin in Moscow in July and hug President Zelensky in Kiev in August. That, to me, is the true strength of India's foreign policy. Its ability to balance relationships without being boxed in. It was this very strength that enabled us to secure a consensus joint communique during our presidency of the G20, which almost everyone thought would be impossible. I also witnessed the transformation of India's diaspora, which was once dismissed as traitors to the motherland and not required Indians, NRIs, not required Indians, accused of fueling a brain drain, to now when we see them as a powerful brain bank capable of advancing India's interests abroad. And I saw Indian soft power blossom, with chicken tikka masala being declared the national dish of Britain and interest booming in all things Indian, from yoga to Ayurveda, Bangalore to Bollywood. So what did my 35-year career in the Indian Foreign Service teach me? I learned many things, but I've distilled them down to 7 overarching lessons, and I thought that's what I'm going to share with all of you today. So the first lesson of diplomacy is to have an open mind. You've all heard the story of the Koop Manduk, the frog in the well. It believes its tiny world is all there is, unable to fathom the existence of something as vast as the ocean. Being in the Foreign Service is the opposite of being a Koop Manduk, because diplomacy forces you to step outside the confines of your own worldview and engage with the vast, complex, and ever-evolving global landscape. When you interact with diverse cultures, live in different cities, you come to realize that the world is much bigger than you imagined, and India is just one part of it. You also develop a comparative scale. You realize where your own country has done well and where it could do better. In fact, one of the key tasks of Indian diplomats is to bring back the world's best practices for India's benefit. We saw this in action during the devastating Delta wave of the COVID-19 pandemic. Within 48 hours of the crisis hitting home, our embassies had secured oxygen plants, ventilators, and PPE kits from friendly nations, demonstrating how global partnerships can translate into life-saving action. The second lesson diplomacy taught me is the virtue of being curious. In my first posting in Ankara, I had an assistant who constantly complained that being in Turkey was like being in jail, because he did not understand the language, did not like their food, and had no friends to speak of. In fact, he actually had a calendar in which he was striking out every day with an X, waiting for his sentence to end. And that was such a waste of a posting. The Foreign Service is unique because it allows us to experience the very DNA of societies and cultures well beyond the surface impressions that people gather as tourists. But you have to make an effort to seek out that essence. The best diplomats don't just represent their country. They actually engage with the world around them. They learn the language, respect local customs and traditions, and build genuine connections. Curiosity is the bridge that transforms a posting into an experience and a career into a lifelong journey of discovery. Curiosity compels us to ask why. Why people think the way they do. Why do traditions endure? Why history unfolded as it did? Transforming observation into understanding. I have always maintained that a posting is made not just by the quality of the city that you are posted in, but by the quality of the conversations you can have in that city. Thanks to the conversations I had, I was able to observe in my very first posting the identity confusion of the Turks, caught between, the modernity of the West and the civilizational pull of the East. My other postings gave me the good fortune of experiencing firsthand America's work ethic, Africa's community spirit, Britain's multiculturalism, Canada's inclusiveness, and the Japanese sublime contemplation of beauty. That same curiosity took me underground into a uranium mine in Saskatchewan and high above the clouds to the summit of Mount Aso in Kyushu in Japan. It led me to a pilgrimage to Mount Kailash and Lake Mansarovar, to the Cape of Good Hope on Africa's southernmost point, and to the mid-Atlantic ridge in Iceland, where Europe and the Americas drift apart. It guided me to Noah's tomb, yes, the Bible's Noah. It guided me to Noah's tomb in Turkey and to chasing the northern lights in Yellowknife in Arctic Canada. And it was that same sense of curiosity, wondering about the answer to the perennial question of what if, that led me to try my hand at fiction and create my debut novel, Q&A, which later became Slumdog Millionaire. The impetus for this novel came from two unlikely sources. The first was the huge success, the massive popularity of Kaun Ganega Karorpati in India. The show became such a craze, I don't know whether some of you here recall that at 9 p.m., when Amitabh Bachchan used to come onto our screens, people used to become positively antisocial. You could not visit them at their houses. I am told weddings used to be stopped at 9 p.m. so that the guests could first watch the show and then the bride and the groom could get on with their peras. The second impetus came from a British Army officer called Major Charles Ingram. I'm sure nobody in this audience has heard of this person. But he appeared on the British edition of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire in September 2001. He correctly answered 15 questions to win the show's maximum prize of £1 million, becoming the third recorded contestant to ever do so. But the producers suspected that something was not quite right about his performance. There was something off. So they reviewed the tapes, and then they discovered that on the questions on which he was initially stumbling, somebody in the audience was signaling to him the correct answers through coded coughs. So when the answer was B, there would be 2 coughs. When the answer was D, there would be 4 coughs. Who were the culprits? His wife and their professor friend. So the scam was exposed, and Ingram was convicted of fraud. The last I heard, he had been forced to quit his job in the army and had become a novelist. So that got me thinking that if a well-educated, respected British Army officer could be accused of cheating, why not have a contestant who would definitely be suspected of cheating? Because you see, we have this latent conceit that those of us who are educated, who go to schools and universities, who read newspapers, they are the only ones who know. And those who have not had the good fortune of going to a school or a university, like the servants and the maids, we just think they are idiots, they don't know anything. I wanted to challenge that notion. I wanted to show that the greatest teacher in the world is life itself. That idea was reinforced when I read about an experiment called the hole in the wall. This happened in 1999, in which a group of computer scientists working at the NIIT campus in Delhi literally carved a hole in the wall that had joined the Kalkaji slum, and they put a computer there facing the slum with an internet connection and a mouse. And then they just observed what happens. And believe it or not, they discovered that within 6 months, children living in that slum had learned all the mouse operations. They could open and close programs, and they were going online to download movies, games, and videos. And they did this without any help, without any teachers, without knowing a word of English, without being educated. That told me that perhaps there is some innate ability in all of us that, given the right opportunity, can surface. And I think Ty is very much in that same game. Entrepreneurship is something in all of us, but only if you give it the right opportunity and mentorship and funding, that is when that entrepreneurship can emerge. So I thought to myself that if a slum kid can use a computer, then a slum kid can also participate in a brain quiz and win. So I juxtaposed these two themes of a game show and of a contestant who has had no formal education, who has street knowledge as opposed to book knowledge. And that's how Q&A was born. Now, I wrote this novel in the last 2 months of my posting in London, at a time when I was all alone. My wife Aparna, who's joined me here today, and our 2 sons, having already left for India, because the school session begins, as you know, in India in April. I was detained, or rather I should say, I was told to stay behind to handle the visit of then Prime Minister of India, Shri Atal Bihari Vajpayee, who was supposed to visit London in September. Taking a cue from this, a male chauvinist friend of mine declared that sometimes behind a successful man is an absent woman. But I didn't write the entire novel in one go. I was very clear in my mind that I don't want to spend 3 years of my life writing a novel for it not to be published. Because don't forget, I was writing this novel in 2003, when the publishing world was still very much controlled by the gatekeeper system. The agents, the publishers, there was no Amazon 70-30 deal that you could just publish it and go to Amazon. So I decided to first write just 4.5 chapters of this new novel, Q&A, and send it out to 10 agents who I thought would be interested in Indian fiction. People, for instance, like Arundhati Roy's agent, David Godwin, whose name I had discovered in the writer's handbook. So I sent out these chapters, and then I waited for these agents to call me back. And I did not hear from any one of these agents, only to realize that even agents have slush piles 10 feet high. And then one day, as I was browsing the internet, I came across a website called everyonewho'sanyone.com. This was by an American writer who had become so fed up with all the rejection slips that he had received that he posted his entire correspondence with editors, publishers, and agents on the web, including their private emails and phone numbers. And there I come across an agent called Peter Buckman, whose name did not exist in the writer's handbook, by the way, who was telling this failed American author that he would be happy to offer his 2 pennies worth of advice if a few chapters were sent to him, either by snail mail or by email. When I read this, I did a double take. Because back then, 2003, first of all, email was not as ubiquitous as it is now. And back then, agents never accepted submissions by email. It was always a hard copy. So I thought, what have I got to lose? I had 4.5 chapters on my computer. I emailed 2.5 chapters to Peter Buckman, together with a cover letter. The next day, I get a reply from him. I love what you have sent me. I would love to read more. At my age, I cannot read very clearly on the screen, so can you send me a hard copy to my address in Oxford? So I said, dear Mr. Buckman, you've made my day. I immediately printed out the remaining 2.5 chapters, and I mailed it to him at his address in Oxford. 2 days later, he phones me at my house. I'm coming to London. I would like to see you. And that is when I panicked. Because till that point, I was merely sending out these, 4.5 chapters to 10 agents. But I had no idea what an agent looks like. What do I talk to him? Do I need a lawyer? Nobody in my family had written a novel. I had no experience of being a novelist at all. So the only person I knew at that point in time who was in the writing business was a gentleman called Patrick French, because he was a part of the India-UK roundtable, which I handled as the political counselor in London. So I called up Patrick and I said, Patrick, I've written something, an agent is coming to meet me. What do I do? And Patrick said, I have no idea what you have written. I have no idea who this agent is. I've never heard of him. So I can only give you one piece of advice. If he asks you for money, don't sign. So basically, he was advising me against these fly-by-night agents who come and say, oh, you've written a nice novel, but it needs a lot of work, and then we'll charge you, £5 per page, and before you know it, you have been gypped out of £1,500, and of course, the novel never gets published. So anyway, Peter Buckman comes to meet me, and the first thing he says is, where is the rest of the novel? And I told him, there is no rest. I haven't written it yet. So Peter says, well, you'll have to finish the novel. You're a first-time novelist. I have no idea whether you'll be able to finish the novel in the way that you have done 4.5 chapters. But I like what I have seen so far. I would like to sign you up as my client. Now that's when my training as a diplomat clicked in, because this guy was a ghost. He did not exist on the internet at all. So I said, if you don't mind, can you tell me some of the other authors that you are representing? And he said, oh, you want to check us out? Okay. Have you heard of a gentleman called Ian Fleming? I said, of course, the guy who wrote James Bond. Well, I represent Ian Fleming. Have you heard of Eric Ambler? I said, yes, I've read all of Eric Ambler's novels. Well, I represent Eric Ambler. Have you heard of Georgette Hare? I said, of course, the Regency romance. Well, I represent Georgette Hare. I said, say no more. Where do I sign? So he signed me up, and I became his client. And believe it or not, the moment I returned back from that lunch to the office, I get a call from Delhi that we are posting you as Director Pakistan as soon as you come back to India after supervising the Prime Minister's visit. And I thought to myself, oh my God, my novel writing is over, because India-Pakistan relations being what they are, I said this will be a 9 to 9, 7 days a week job, and I can forget about writing a novel when I'm back in Delhi. So now I still had 1 month left in London, and I had now an agent. And I thought to myself, how many authors even have agents? So I said, can I finish this novel while I'm still in London, while I have not gone back to Delhi? And really, that's the target I set myself. I wrote like a maniac. One weekend, I did 20,000 words. On the 11th of September 2003, I completed the manuscript in about 2.5 months' time, and I mailed it to Peter Buckman, my agent. On the 12th of September 2003, I was sitting in an Air India plane going back to Delhi. Within 3 months of receiving my novel, my agent was able to place it with Random House, who said, we like this novel, it's a big novel, all our big novels are lined up, so we'll publish it only after 2 years in 2005. But we are ready to sign the contract, so the contract was signed, and Peter Buckman sent me my check, and with that he sent me a little post-it which said, client number 1. So I said, hang on, am I the client who has got the highest advance? He says, no, you were my first client. So basically what happened was, his agency was called the Ampersand Agency, the and sign, and he was in partnership with another Peter called Peter Jansen Smith. And Peter Jansen Smith was the agent for Ian Fleming and Eric Ambler and Georgette Hare. Peter Buckman was just getting into agenting, and I happened to be his first client. Anyway, when I was writing this novel, I had no idea that it would get translated into 47 languages, take me to literary festivals all across the world, and finally bring me to the Oscar stage. And I realized that in Hollywood, they do things differently. There the saying goes, behind every successful man, there is a woman, and behind the woman is the wife. The Oscar ceremony was indeed an amazing experience, where Slumdog Millionaire won 8 Oscars. I found it to be a very well choreographed and slick production, but the moment it ended, there was complete chaos. There was no one even to guide me to the parking lot. So I wandered off on my own and accidentally barged into Jennifer Aniston's makeup room. I thought, oh my God, I'm going to be arrested now. But luckily, my black bandgala saved me, and she, instead of handing me over to security, had a 10-minute conversation with me, telling me how much she adored India. Because really, I think what Slumdog Millionaire did was, it really brought India to the world's greatest entertainment stage. Before that, any film which had any bit of India in it was dismissed as something that catered only to the Indian diaspora. It was Slumdog Millionaire that first changed the opinion about India as a powerhouse, which had a lot of talent, not just in terms of, the stories that we produce, but also in terms of the technical talent that we have. And after that, as you know, A.R. Rahman went on to score, songs for so many Western films. Anil Kapoor got roles in so many other productions. Dev Patel has now become an international hero. Frida Pinto also parlayed that initial success into a number of roles. So the third lesson of diplomacy, to come back to my original topic, is to be adaptable. As a diplomat, you have to adapt to a new country every 3 years. You have to adapt to a new city, a new culture, a new cuisine, and often a new language. Your kids have to adapt to a new school, a new curriculum, and a new set of classmates every 3 years. And unless you have a powerful godfather, you can't even get to choose the posting that you are going to get. So sometimes it's very often the luck of the draw, whether you get Kuala Lumpur or Kinshasa. You have to adapt even to your own embassy, because the Foreign Service does not allow us to pick our team or our leader. We are thrown into a new work environment on every posting. We get to work with a different set of people every time, and we have to adapt and give it our best. And that is only possible if you are a team player. Me, myself, and I just doesn't work in the Foreign Service, at least not now. In a sense, this adaptation is a lifelong one. At first, diplomats had to adapt to technology, and now we have to adapt to the new age diplomacy conducted on Twitter and Facebook. We have to adapt to the reality that diplomats are no longer the only one doing diplomacy. Diplomacy is now also being conducted by a host of other organizations, civil society organizations, cultural entities, the media, the business. They also contribute to the shaping of foreign policy. But the biggest shift I think we now have to prepare for is the impact of artificial intelligence. AI is not just another technology. It is a disruptive force that has cracked the operating system of humanity, that is language. And it will reshape how we work, how we learn, how we interact, challenging our very notions of creativity, authenticity, and intelligence. Misinformation at scale, deepfake technology, and AI-generated propaganda are already creating challenges for diplomats, making it hard to distinguish fact from fiction. Businesses must also brace for a world where AI transforms job markets, disrupts supply chains, and redefines competitive advantages across industries. Yet for all its computational power, AI still lacks one crucial element: human judgment. Algorithms can process data at lightning speed, but they cannot navigate the subtleties of human interaction, the nuance of a well-placed word, or the delicate balance of diplomacy. That is why the fourth lesson of diplomacy is so important, and it is the importance of tact. Now, tact is the ability to tell the truth in such a way that it considers other people's feelings and reactions. Diplomats have to be skillful in managing delicate situations, handling people, and conveying tough messages at times without burning bridges, and that is why tact is necessary. In fact, the very definition of a good diplomat is a person who can tell you to go to hell in such a way that you actually look forward to the trip. There is the story about a diplomat who was very devoted to his pet cat, Oscar, and had to go on a 2-week business trip to a remote part of Africa. His 87-year-old mother was not in very good shape, so he decides to leave Oscar with his best friend. For 14 days, he is cut off from the rest of the world with no cell phone signal and no internet. But the moment he reaches the capital city and gets a signal, he calls up his friend and asks him, "So tell me, how's Oscar? Is he eating well?" "He's dead," says his friend. "Fell down from the roof and broke his net." The diplomat is naturally devastated and he breaks down. But after regaining his composure, he snaps. "You know, a diplomat would never have broken bad news like that. He would have broken it tactfully and gently." "How?" asks his friend. "The cat is dead." "Well," the diplomat explained, "when I called you today, you could have said Oscar was on the roof and wouldn't come down. When I called tomorrow, you could have said he fell, but the vet was doing everything possible. And on the third day, you could have told me, I'm sorry he didn't make it. And I would have been able to handle it, and I would have been prepared for it, in fact." His friend thought about it and apologized. "You know, you're right. I'll be more tactful next time." "Good," said the diplomat. "Anyways, how's my mother doing?" The friend pauses for a long moment and then replies, "Well, she's climbed onto the roof of the house and won't come down." Now, being tactful also means choosing your words carefully, because one wrong nuance can cause a diplomatic incident. And this applies especially when translation is involved. US President Jimmy Carter was at the receiving end during his 1977 visit to Poland. In a speech, in a public speech, he said he wanted to know about the Polish people's desires for the future, but his interpreter translated it as, in future, I want to have sex with the Poles. But the worst case of mistranslation took place in 1945 at the height of the Second World War. By July of that year, Japan was weakened to the point of defeat. The big four of the Allied forces, the United States, Great Britain, the Soviet Union, and the People's Republic of China, gathered in Potsdam, Germany, and sent a strongly worded ultimatum to the Japanese Prime Minister, Kantaro Suzuki, demanding Japan's unconditional surrender. The terms included a statement to the effect that any negative answer from Japan would invite prompt and utter destruction. Once they had sent this ultimatum, they waited tensely for a reply because that would determine how World War II would end. Meanwhile, in Tokyo, newspaper reporters pressed Prime Minister Suzuki to say something about Japan's decision. Now, no formal decision had yet been taken. Therefore, Suzuki, falling back upon the politician's old standby answer to reporters, replied that he was withholding comment. Now, because he spoke only in Japanese, he used the Japanese word mokusatsu, which is derived from the Japanese term for silence and can have a range of meanings from no comment to remain in wise and masterly inactivity. When the term mokusatsu found its way into the hands of English translators, they translated it as, believe it or not, ignore with contempt. This translation mistake, which did not match Suzuki's attitude or intention, circulated amongst American media, stirring outrage. An atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima 10 days later. A translation error that instantaneously killed 70,000 people and some 100,000 more as a result of the destruction and radiation. And this brings me to the fifth lesson of diplomacy: patience. Diplomacy is not instant noodles. It takes time for diplomacy to bear results, sometimes years and decades. A good example is the India-Bangladesh land border agreement. The issue of enclaves, tiny pockets of Indian and Bangladeshi territory trapped inside each other's borders, had been unresolved since 1947, when Bangladesh was in fact East Pakistan. For decades, people living in these enclaves were effectively stateless, lacking basic rights and access to government services. Diplomatic negotiations started in the 1970s. In 1974, a tentative agreement was also agreed to, but India did not ratify that agreement. It took 4 decades before the historic agreement was finally signed in 2015. The land border agreement led to the peaceful exchange of 111 Indian enclaves in Bangladesh and 51 Bangladeshi enclaves in India, resolving a problem that had lasted for nearly 7 decades. So as a diplomat, you learn to be patient and for results to appear only after years of negotiations, because geopolitics takes time and evolves slowly. At least it used to. These days, geopolitics has also become unpredictable, fast-moving, and relentless. Events that once took decades to unfold now happen in months. In fact, in the era of Trump 2.0, the global order is more volatile than ever. Traditional diplomatic playbooks are being rewritten as policies can change with a tweet, trade wars can be triggered in an instant, and international agreements once thought sacrosanct can be undone overnight. The wars in Ukraine and Gaza have completely upended the international rules-based order, and the resurgence of unilateralism and great power competition has sounded the death knell of multilateralism. It's almost as if history is on steroids. But even in these turbulent times, patience remains invaluable, not just in diplomacy, but in life itself. It was the virtue of patience that allowed me to wait for 11 years to bring my latest novel, The Girl with the 7 Lives, to life. Not that it took me 11 years to write that novel, but the demands of my day job. First, as the official spokesman of the Ministry of External Affairs, where I faced a press conference every Thursday, then becoming High Commissioner to Canada, where bilateral relations suddenly became very challenging, then returning to India as Secretary West and plunging straight into the pandemic, left no time to devote to fiction. But the story of the girl with 7 lives stayed with me, waiting for the right moment to be told. Much like nations navigating shifting alliances, my protagonist Devi must constantly reinvent herself to survive, becoming successively Deepa, Diba, Dasmeet, Deepthi, Diana, and Dolly. In a world where the ground beneath her in a world where the ground beneath her keeps shifting, she learned that survival isn't just about strength, but about knowing when to adapt, when to wait, and when to seize the moment. But adaptation alone is not enough. Success in diplomacy and life often hinges on something even more fundamental, the ability to negotiate and find common ground. And this brings me to the sixth lesson of diplomacy, the value of compromise. Now, compromise is an essential part of diplomacy, leadership, and everyday life. In negotiations, whether between nations or between companies, rigid positions rarely lead to success. The ability to meet others halfway, find common ground, and craft solutions that work for all sides, it what distinguishes a skilled diplomat from a mere negotiator. But let me be clear, compromise does not mean surrender. It means striving for a win-win outcome where both sides feel that they have gained something rather than walked away empty-handed. And sometimes this requires something even more difficult, the willingness to recognize flaws in your own argument. This is particularly crucial in multilateral negotiations, where diverse interests must be reconciled. If every country had struck rigidly to its maximalist position, we would never have had the World Trade Organization or the Paris Agreement on climate change, or even the COVID-19 vaccine sharing initiatives that help nations in need. Progress happens when we recognize that the best outcome is not about one side winning and the other losing. It's about finding a path that works for everyone. And this brings me to the final lesson of diplomacy, which is also the most important one, to always look at the big picture. What do I mean by big picture? I mean the ability to rise above short-term setbacks, personal grievances, and momentary wins or losses to focus on the larger goal. The best diplomats, leaders, and decision makers understand that focusing too much on trivial details can blind us to what really matters. There's a good illustration of this in the story about Sherlock Holmes and his sidekick, Dr. Watson. So the great detective and Dr. Watson go on a camping trip. After a good dinner and a bottle of wine, they retire for the night and go to sleep inside their tent. Some hours later, Holmes wakes up and nudges his faithful friend. Watson, look up and tell me, what do you see? Watson looks up. I see millions and millions of stars, Holmes. And what do you deduce from that? Asks Holmes. Watson ponders for a moment. Well, astronomically, it tells me that there are millions of galaxies and potentially billions of planets. Astrologically, I observe that Saturn is in Leo. Horologically, I deduce that the time is approximately 3:15. Meteorologically, I suspect that we will have a beautiful day tomorrow. Theologically, I can see that God is all-powerful and we are a small and insignificant part of the universe. Then he turns to his friend and asks smugly, but what does it tell you, Holmes? Holmes is silent for a moment. Watson, you idiot, he says finally, it means someone has stolen our tent. So this is what happens when we miss the forest for the trees. The ability to rise above distractions and recognize what truly matters is especially critical in diplomacy. International relations are really straightforward. They are layered, dynamic, and often fraught with fiction. There are disputes over borders, trade, security, and even ideology. It is easy to get bogged down in short-term conflicts and lose sight of the larger strategic interests that define a nation's trajectory. The European Union, for instance, born from a continent ravaged by war, became a reality only because its architects understood that common prosperity mattered more than historical enmities. Unfortunately, under President Trump, America is moving in the opposite direction. The defining element of America's foreign policy in much of the post-war period was strategic altruism, the idea that investing in global stability ultimately served US interests. But President Trump has abandoned this long-standing principle in favor of transactional diplomacy, prioritizing short-term gains over enduring alliances. Perhaps the most alarming consequence of this short-sightedness is its impact on the fight against climate change. Global commitments, painstakingly forged through years of negotiation, are being brushed aside in favor of an energy policy that revives the outdated mantra of drill, baby, drill. This is a purely short-term, what should I say? It's a purely short-term outlook that is actually compromising our planet's future. So seeing the big picture is what separates true leadership from mere opportunism. Nations, like individuals, thrive when they think beyond immediate gains and invest in a future that is sustainable, stable, and inclusive. So, to recap, the 7 lessons of diplomacy are to have an open mind, be curious, be adaptable, be tactful, be patient, be flexible in negotiation, and always see the big picture. And these lessons of diplomacy are equally relevant in all other walks of life. Whether you are a businessman or a banker, a teacher or a doctor, a husband or a wife, embracing these 7 qualities will serve you well. Now, one of the advantages of standing at the podium is that I can also see the big picture. And the big picture tells me that this needs to be a dialogue, not a monologue. I have spoken far too long. It is time for me to hear you. So I'll stop here, open up the floor for questions, and just say thank you. Because Upasana said we must have time for some Q&A as well. Yes.
Vikas, thanks for the wonderful. Thank you for the wonderful, exposition of what diplomacy entails. What is the role of trust in diplomacy, or does such a thing exist? Because the positions are continuously shifting.
No, trust is the most important element, I think, in diplomacy. But, as diplomats, we always say the old Reagan mantra, trust but verify. Why do you think we are not having relationship with Pakistan? Because there is a lack of trust. We could not even complete a Siachen agreement where, it would have been monitored by helicopters, the armies on both sides would have gone down. We are sitting there in sub-zero temperatures, spending $1 million per day. But because there was lack of trust, there was always the feeling, oh, the moment we come down, Pakistan will grab it, or something or the other will happen. And that's why I think trust is very, very important. Today, what is happening under Trump is the trust that America enjoyed in terms of its transatlantic alliances, in terms of its position as the beacon of liberty and hope, as in fact, why did we think of America as a great country? Because of the institutions that America had. The FDA, the FAA, we believed in those institutions. But now you're gutting all those institutions. So America will never be great again. In fact, Trump is making America into a Switzerland. An ordinary country which does not really carry weight in international affairs.
So, sorry for the follow-up, but I want to come closer home, right? And if you look at India's relationship with pretty much all of its neighbors, right? They have undergone this change.
Absolutely.
So clearly, trust seems to be transient.
Correct. No, so obviously, see, trust is not something that is there in perpetuity, because you can gain trust and you can lose trust as in everyday life. I mean, you are, as a businessman, deal with so many suppliers, and some supplier you are trusting, and suddenly that supplier refuses to pay your money, and then that trust is lost. So same, I think, happens in international relations, because in international relations, the old adage is, they are never permanent friends or permanent enemies, they are permanent interests. If you have permanent interests, so because of the neighborhood we live in, and because the fact of geography cannot be changed, we will always have permanent interests in all the countries around our periphery, whether it is China or Pakistan or Nepal or Bhutan or Maldives, we will always have permanent interests. But whether they trust India or they don't trust India, I think can wax or wane, depending on the kind of political dispensation you have here. Now, under Sheikh Hasina, for instance, in Bangladesh, there was a lot of trust. There was so much trust that we agreed to everything she wanted us to do, and she agreed to everything that we wanted her to do. But, sometimes that trust can also be misused, where she became increasingly autocratic, and we probably did not see those warning signals. And now that trust is lost because the new government in Bangladesh looks at India with distrust, because they say, you promoted this lady, you were complicit in her actions, you did not give her the warning signs when the writing was on the wall, and today we do not trust you. So we have to now regain that trust. So the good thing in diplomacy is you can regain trust also. Today, look at Canada. I was High Commissioner in Canada. The only 2 countries where we don't have High Commissioners, one is Pakistan, the other is Canada. And the last thing I imagined when I was High Commissioner that one day a day would come where we would not have High Commissioners in each other's countries. Because now there is a trust deficit between India and Canada. Canada believes we are conducting assassinations on Canadian soil. We believe that Canada is not paying enough heed to our security concerns regarding Khalistani terrorists. And as long as the trust deficit remains, relationship will remain in limbo. So how do we bridge that trust deficit? And that is why, track 2 diplomacy comes in, track 1.5 diplomacy comes in. There are various instrumentalities that are available to diplomats to bridge that trust deficit. But the trust deficit has to be bridged, because if the trust deficit is not bridged, then the relationship will wither and die, actually.
I had a question here.
Yeah, but I thought first the
Sure.
gentleman here. Yes.
It is interesting to see your experience from Pakistan to London and Canada then and Canada today. But in terms of the mission head or and the representative of a country in another country, and suddenly because what our politicians or political leaders say, you get the marching orders or you get the beating. How does that work?
So the good thing is that unlike the American system, where I would say 70 to 80% of their ambassadors are political appointees. And by political appointees, I mean people who have contributed to the then president, to his campaign and things like that. And they are the ones who are sent out as ambassador to France and Germany and all these places. In India, unfortunately, thankfully, in India, we do not have that tradition. In fact, as we speak, I think there are not more than 2 or 3 political appointees in the entire Indian diplomatic service, which means all our ambassadors are professionals who are sent, on behalf of the government of India, who are supposed to be apolitical, who are supposed to serve the government of the day, and they are not supposed to give their resignation once the government changes. So from that point of view, in fact, I would say the Indian Foreign Service is the only service where your security of tenure is guaranteed. The IAS and the IPS, they can be given marching orders on 30 minutes notice if you do not comply with some directive or whatever. But in the Foreign Service, at least, first of all, that cognitive dissonance does not exist. All of us believe, there is a continuity in Indian foreign policy. We believe that, the current government is also doing a fantastic job in terms of flying the Indian flag. And we are very proud to be, enlarging India's footprint abroad, enlarging India's stakeholders abroad, and bringing what is needed for India, whether it is foreign direct investment or whether it is, best practices. All those things are very much part of our arsenal. Yeah.
I'm curious to know, what do you think of the G0 phenomena? Do you think it's there is a power vacuum that we are looking at away from the G5, the G7, the G20? How are you looking at it? Because that seems to be something everybody is talking about.
Look, I think there is a real crisis of leadership in the world. There is no doubt about it. And I think the reason why this has happened is, and that's my personal take, in the era of social media, no politician is seen as a demigod. The way we lionize JFK, etc., Reagan, JFK, Konrad Adenauer, Angela Merkel. I think in today's day and age, short-termism has come to rule the roost, and as a result, politicians are seen as people with feet of clay also. So there is a real crisis of leadership. I mean, Gaza, what is happening is an open genocide. There are now 2 words about it. It is an open genocide, but the International Criminal Court has also called it so as such. But we are just walking into that open genocide. There's no leader, except for, I think, few leaders in Ireland, in Spain, and some other places, who are willing to call out what is happening there. Then look at what's happening in Ukraine. I mean, a country is invaded, a sovereign country is invaded, its territory is occupied, and now President Trump says, Ukraine started that war. So I think there is a real crisis of leadership, but at the end of the day, Trump is a deal maker. There will be a deal on Ukraine. And my sense is Trump does not want a G0. Trump wants a G2 or a G3. And the G2 will be, USA and Russia. The G3 will be USA, Russia, and China, because he has clearly cut out the Europeans from any possible deal. He sees Europe as a vassal, as vassal states who are just supposed to do the bidding because they have the American nuclear umbrella. But beyond that, he's not prepared to lift a finger to help Europe. So my sense is that the world will continue to be divided into zones of influence, spheres of influence, whatever you might call it, whether it is G2 or G3 or whatever. We, of course, believe in a G20 because we believe that the world has become totally multipolar now. In fact, Marco Rubio, the foreign minister of America, has said so openly now. He says it's a multipolar world USA is just one part of it, meaning that USA does not want to be the global hegemon, the global policeman that it used to be, in the immediate aftermath of the end of the Cold War. USA is willing to be a minor player as long as it protects its own national interests and as long as it helps revive the American economy. I mean, that's all America is looking for at the moment. Now, whether the vacuum that America will create, will that vacuum remain or will Russia and China fill in? I think that is an open question that remains to be seen.
Vikas, question. So in almost every country recently, or in the last 10 years, we've seen powers which are to the right of the center.
Correct.
Or even extreme right.
Correct.
And this is, I believe in every country, those powers have become stronger and have risen. Is that something of concern? Or is it a trend which, comes and goes? What are your thoughts?
Well, I used to believe that this is cyclical, that, right now, right-wing populism is on the rise. Right-wing populists are ruling Italy. They came second in Germany. 20%, AfD won 20% of the vote, became the second largest party there. They won the highest number of votes in Netherlands, in Greece, even in the Nordic countries, Sweden and Denmark, you have right-wing parties which are in power now. Austria now, you have a right-wing party in power. So right-wing is definitely on the ascendant. Javier Milei in Argentina, Donald Trump in the United States. There is no doubt about it that right-wing parties are on the ascendant right now. Whether it is cyclical or not, I think is an open question for the simple reason. In the past, when these phenomena used to happen, the cycle used to change, the right would go down, the left would go up. Why? Because people were still open to other points of view and were willing to change their point of view. But in the era of social media, what is happening is we are living in closed echo chambers. You are only hearing the feeds that you want to hear. You are not listening to other points of view, so your own prejudices are getting reinforced. You are not exposed at all to alternative points of view. So if that happens, will social media continue to keep us in those echo chambers, and AI will amplify that disinformation, which will keep us embedded in those echo chambers? Then this could be a long-term phenomena. But right now we have to see also what is fueling this right-wing populism. What is fueling is economic distress. Because at the root cause, globalization. Why did globalization start? Globalization started because the West, everybody already had their 2 cars and their 3 televisions. They needed markets where they could sell their products to. So they said, okay, let's improve the standard of living of these poorer countries so that they can buy our products. What they did not reckon was that these poorer countries would not only, buy their products, but would actually start producing their products in their own factories at 1/10 the cost. And as a result, lock, stock, and barrel, production moved out of the Western countries. 90% went to China, but 10% also went to the tiger economies, Malaysia, Vietnam, all these other countries. And as a result, the manufacturing became hollowed out in the West. And that has created this class of disaffected people who pine for the good old days when their wages were rising, when their incomes were rising, when America was still a powerhouse. And they have now been promised a return to the good old days by these populist leaders. Trump says, make America great again, I will make America great again. In Italy, Meloni says, I will make Italy great again. In Austria, Piketty, and if you read others. But the problem is, the replacement for capitalism is also no good. I mean, communism is already a failed exercise. So what do we have? I think what we need to have is capitalism with a human face. I think that is what is needed, humanistic capitalism. And that is the need of the hour, because pure capitalism will create these inequalities. Today, the world is more unequal than it was even before the First World War. The Gini coefficient, if you see, it's the most unequal world ever in the history of existence. And not just in India, even in America, all these places. The rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer. So unless we redefine capitalism, unless we make capitalism with a more human face, where a social security net is also there, my sense is we are going to continue to face these problems.
Yeah, just a follow-on question to that. I think you're mentioning a lot of things. So what is, in this context, what is the future of democracy? Because you mentioned polarization.
Future of democracy is also in doubt, because you see, if you look at the latest polling, even in a place like America, where almost 40% of people are saying that, well, if democracy does not exist, it's not a problem for us. Because you see, many people of this generation have grown up without the Second World War, without having seen what fascism is all about, what Nazism was all about. And they do not care. As long as their Twitter feed is operational, their TikTok is operational, you know, they think everything is fine. If you look at VDEM Institute, their annual ranking, the world today has more non-democracies than democracies for the first time since the 1960s. So that's the state of the world that we are in, because I think every strongman leader wants to end, you know, democratic checks and balances. I mean, that's what Trump is doing by gutting all these federal agencies, by gutting all these independent oversight agencies. I mean, he's creating the grounds for a complete takeover of the government. And with a pliant Supreme Court, he'll probably get away with it.
Yeah, so absolutely that's fine. We can discuss about American democracy, but can we talk about the Indian democracy, state of democracy right now, or is it a maybe sensitive topic?
No, it's not a taboo topic. My sense is, look, Indian democracy is still very much alive for the simple reason that contestation still exists. I mean, if you look at this map of the states, BJP now rules 19 states, but we have 28 states. So it's not as if that the BJP is all conquering and it's everywhere. And the fact is the BJP has to mount an operation every time. It's not as if that the BJP just sits back and says, okay, you know, people just believe in our vision and we will just win. No, they actually make an effort. They change the incumbent chief ministers, as they did in Haryana, as they did in Rajasthan, as they did in Madhya Pradesh. So they actually are working overtime to ensure that their message reaches the people. I mean, it is the most well-organized political party in the history of the world, I would say, at the moment. And they deserve to win what they have won, because their message has percolated. I think we have the weakest opposition ever in the history of India at this particular point in time.
I think we've had lots of questions and we will have enough time. Vikas is going to be here with us this evening, so we will have enough time to interact with him. That was the idea. Thank you so much, Vikas. This has been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you, thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for this wonderful round of applause. May I invite Alok on the stage to give a token of affection to Vikas. We really want to thank both our gifting partners, which is Beast Life and Pool. Pool is a startup that resides in a tier 2 town, Kanpur, and now has reached the world, including EU, where they are exporting in a big way. Thank you again, Vikas.